So we should say that the story was originally made by sci-fi writer Jules Verne, who also authored Journey to the Centre of the Earth, Around the World in 80 Days, and many other stories beside this. And he wrote this between 1869 and 1870, as it was serialized in a fortnightly periodical called the Magazine de l'Éducation et de Récréation. See, my French has got way better than it was back in the day. And we should say that it was finally published in 1871. Now, Disney ended up choosing the story in 1950 as he was inspired by the True Life Adventures series that contained many different shots of marine footage. And so in 1951, he bought the rights to the story from Sid Rodgell with storyboards from Harper Goff, who is uncredited due to the fact he was not a member of the International Alliance of Theatrical Stage Employees. And we should also say that the story was largely kept the same as it was in the original novel, the only differences being that in the film, the submarine, for instance, is nuclear powered. And we should also say as well that much of the story is actually streamlined and the actual event order of the different scenes was switched about a little bit just to make it a more compelling story. And so that talks about the story of the creative process, but now we have to talk about the story of the studio. So the film was entirely shot within the Bahamas and in Jamaica. And we should also say that filming of it began on January the 11th, 1954, and the film crew numbered over 400 people. And this was largely to do with the fact of the sheer number of special effects which were in the film. So in particular, the giant squid scene, that had to be entirely reshot. And the reason for that is because when it was originally shot, it was actually in a very calm sea and it was shot at dusk, as opposed to in the film where it's shot at twilight and it's obviously a very rough sea. Now, the reason why they did this is twofold. First of all, to add a bit of drama, but then second of all, it was mainly to do with the fact that there were so many cables that were coming out of this huge mechanical giant squid. And so if they had more choppy seas, this would cover much of this up. So that's another reason why they had to shoot the entire scene. And because of mishaps like that, as well as the fact they had such a huge casting, this ended up being the most expensive Hollywood film up until this point. And so this ties in nicely with the casting for this, which is absolutely brilliant. So, first of all, we have to say that Ned Land, he is played by Kirk Douglas. So if you haven't seen Path of Glory or Spartacus, both of which are early Kubrick films, which we'll cover more in depth when we get onto the Kubrick series, yeah, he was the star in both of those films, and also I think that he does a really brilliant job playing Ned in this. Next, we should say that Captain Nemo is played by James Mason, who again appears in Lolita, which is another classic Kubrick film, and he also appeared in The Journey to the Centre of the Earth as well in 1959. Next, we have to talk about Paul Lucas, and he's the person who plays Professor Aronnax, and he appeared in 55 Days at Peking. And definitely go and check out our video on the other channel, which looked at what if the scramble for China happened, right? So definitely go and check that video out for more information on that. Next, we have to talk about Conseil, and he is played by Peter Law, and he appeared in Casablanca, but then also appeared in Around the World in 80 Days. Next, we have to talk about Robert J. Wilk, and he plays the first mate in this, and he also appeared in Spartacus, and later would appear in Magnificent Seven. Next, you have to talk about Ted Corsier, and he plays Captain Farragut in this, and he also appears in The Killing from 1956, which again is another classic Kubrick film. And we should also say as well, there were some other minor actors in this who weren't in anything particularly notable. And so with that, we have to conclude the story of the studio, but now we have to talk about the themes and the history of this story. So first of all, I would say that the major theme of this is one of morality. And actually, the entire film is very questionable in terms of there's not necessarily a hero, everyone within it is an anti-hero. So whether it's Captain Nemo, who obviously, he's trying to save the world, but he's doing it by sinking ships and killing people and stuff. So is he necessarily the good guy? Then if you look at Professor Aronnax, again, is he necessarily the good guy? Because the only reason he's kind of going along with all this is in pursuit of science. Is it Ned Land? Not really. I mean, he just is looking out for money and stuff. But that's kind of all his motivation really is. He doesn't really care about anyone in particular. Even when he knocks out the professor at the end, it's not for any real deeper reason. It's not like he really cares about him. It's more just the professor's an inconvenience. And so he'd rather just knock him out just to kind of keep the ball rolling. So within that, there's a very questionable morality, and it kind of spoke into the wider thing of, at the time, in the 19th century when this story originated, this is the Belle Epoch. And we covered this in more depth in our video on aristocrats, but in this era, this is where you had a great deal of inequality, and so this ties in with the theme of class within this, because, as we can see, how Captain Nemo and the others talk about Ned Land, for instance, is very, very clear that they look down on him because, for instance, the fact that he didn't have the proper table etiquette, the fact that Ned Land isn't exactly what you call a gentleman as such. This kind of is reinforced time and time again, and actually you can kind of understand why Ned Land is so focused on money. Because in this era here, where there's very little social mobility, the only way that he would actually end up having his own ship is if he ended up becoming rich. So for him, he sees all the jewels there as a way of, it's his ticket out of things. Whereas for all the others who were kind of born into wealth, they're kind of like, they don't really care about the treasure because they've grown up with treasure. So for them, they're more focused on science or this and the other. Whereas for Ned, he's like, this is my one ticket out of all this mess. And actually, this was a driving theme for many different explorers at the time, because of course, this was the era of exploration. It's where Europeans were going all the way around the world and they were exploring different things. And of course, the last parts of the map are being scientifically kind of whittled down, but still you've kind of got these old stories of like sea monsters and stuff. And so there's kind of this clash between the old world and the new world, in the sense of, scientific endeavors. And then we should also say, of course, this is the Industrial Revolution. So the book, of course, is kind of focused more on the original Industrial Revolution and the huge technological changes that it had there. But of course, the film, being made in the 1950s, was also in a period of great technological improvement, especially with regard to nuclear power. But it's given the warnings of, some of the effects of this nuclear power. So this is something which, whether it's in the 19th century or whether it's in the 1950s, it still is very relevant to the people who were either watching it or reading it at the time, because they were living through an era of great technological change and talking about some of the wide implications of that, because mankind can either use it for great good or for great evil. And so there's a debate about the morality of this technology and what it's going to actually be used for. And so with that covers the themes and the history of it. And now let's talk about the legacy of the film.